Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're having a good day. Today, once again, we are starting our episode in front of this majestic structure in front of you, but this time it is because I am about ready to call this build complete. At least the outside of it. The inside still doesn't have a whole lot going on, but I figure we will get around to that in good time once I decide what's going to go in there. Now, I say the build itself there is complete, the outside. I do want to do a little bit of work around the foundations here, because I had started off placing it kind of on stilts almost, kind of setting up a polished andesite foundation for it there, but as the build went on, I decided it was a little bit too big for that, so perhaps what we can do instead is work on, like, making a kind of perimeter wall around here that's going to sort of follow the line of the river, and then we're going to build a bridge from over here to over there, and in the process of that, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about how to choose materials to build with, which is a very subjective discussion, so I don't expect everybody to agree with what I'm saying, but this is kind of more my philosophy on building again. This is kind of how I tend to approach builds when it comes to picking materials, choosing a location, and how the surroundings kind of inform the type of materials that I prefer to use. But before I do any of that, I'm going to end a pearl over here to the build itself and check out the interior, which is looking pretty great right now. The kind of non-functional elevator out the back here is a nice little pad where, thankfully, with this torch here, no mobs can spawn. But inside, I've got my favorite kind of floor or ceiling design where it gradiates in with different colors of wood. We've got some dark oak there, we've got some spruce, we've got some oak, and then we've got some birch down the center, and then it kind of forms this nice gradient of color. And I tend to do this whenever I can't figure out what to do with a ceiling or a floor, because it always looks kind of good. I quite like the way it kind of goes from the darkest to the lightest wood color and back again. You'll notice that I'm skipping out jungle wood and acacia wood in this because they are both kind of different colors. They're more kind of orange tint sort of thing. Jungle wood tends to be a little bit kind of a muted pinkish orange, almost like the granite down there actually. And then acacia wood is really bright. You've seen the orange end textures of those logs. You know what's up. So I left those out of this. And especially because we've only just brought back the jungle wood from the jungle itself. Look at those squids dying down there. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab some of the sugarcane from these storage chests over here where it's been merrily collecting while I've been working on the build. And this is all going pretty well as far as I can tell. So I'm going to take that back to the house. We're going to do a little bit more trading, and I'm hopefully going to grab myself another couple of mending books to continue mending all of my gear, because as you can see, some of this stuff is getting a little bit tatty. The axe needs mending on it. I've got mending on these already, but my sword definitely needs it, and my leggings are looking a little bit damaged as well, just from taking damage from fighting and so forth. The helmet and the boots are at full durability because I haven't really been doing a whole lot of mob fighting, and the elytra, because I've been flying around a little bit, are about half right now, but they're fine. They will do for the moment. And I'm going to see if I can unlock the paper trade of the guy downstairs, because he's definitely going to give me a better deal on all this paper. Let's look into what other trades this librarian needs for us to do. We could probably trade him some books. I do have a lot of spare books, and with a paper and leather farm, it's nice and easy to make more. We've still got tons from when we raided the stronghold. We could trade him for some more bookshelves. 4 emeralds for a bookshelf is a bit of a steep price. One of the other things we can do is make written books, which are actually a fun thing to have in Minecraft in general, especially on multiplayer servers, because you can leave instructions for people in them, that kind of thing. Let me quickly take a look here. Yes, we have a couple of feathers here. So I'll show you how to make written books as an example, but we probably won't go too heavily into that because I don't have a chicken farm right now, so we don't have any, large-scale source of feathers. With an ink sac and a feather in combination with a book gets you a book and quill. Now, these can be written in by right-clicking to open it and then typing whatever you happen to want to type in here. I'm going to go with, this is a written book. Nice and boring, like that. And then we can sign it, and you can enter a title. So we're going to go with trade, because I think that will work. We can sign that, close it, and it turns into a book that kind of looks like it has the enchantment glow to it, but it isn't enchanted in any way. It's not going to apply any new things to our tools. Even if we wrote, curse of binding on this, it's not going to actually turn into a curse of binding enchanted book. Instead, what that means is that the book cannot be altered in any way. I can't click here and edit it at all. Once it is signed, it is sealed, and that's actually pretty useful on multiplayer servers if you're trying to put down the rules of something or trying to set a price for one of your shops. You don't want people modifying the book to say something different, do you? So by combining this in a crafting table or in a crafting interface in general, you get a copy of the book, and you can do that several times, and if you have multiple copies, they will actually stack up, and that's what you use for trading. So it's actually a good thing that I have another feather, because I will need to make another copy of this. And shift-click it, and there you go. You can see it stacks up as a copy of our original written book. Now all I have to do is wander down to the librarian down here, and we should be able to trade him these 2 written books for 1 emerald. Enjoy those, and that's the first time I've done the trade, so it's going to unlock the paper trade, which is precisely what I wanted it to do, because I want to trade him all of this paper. Here we go, Mendelssohn. Let's have 2 of those. Thank you kindly. That trade is all locked up. Let's see if he unlocks it again. Nope. Okay, we're going to have to do a little bit of trading with him to unlock the mending books once more, but that should not be a problem. Now let's see about getting mending applied to these leggings. It's been long enough. I don't want to apply that written book. There we go. 5 levels. Sounds like a steal to me. Reapply those. And what else should we put mending on? I think probably this sword, even though the axe is looking a little bit the worse for wear. Axes aren't too hard to come by, and this sword is one of my favorite weapons I've ever had. It's got all of the best enchantments, all of the stuff that I usually like to have on it. Let's see how much this is going to cost. Only 9 levels. Well, since we've got 13, I feel like we should probably give this a name to add an extra level to this. What should we call this sword? I'm feeling in a Thundercats mood today, so we're going to go with Sword of Omens. There we go. Always wanted one of these. So there we go. We've got ourselves a mending sword. We can swipe at this zombie outside who is trying to come in for the villagers. Have at you, sir! You will mend the Sword of Omens. Fantastic stuff. And I don't know if that actually went onto the sword or if it went onto my leggings or elytra, but the elytra is nearly fully mended again now, so that was great. The experience from all of those trades served us well. Time to sleep, make it day, and let's talk builds. Having come back from the jungle with a stack and a bit of jungle logs and some jungle saplings, we are now able to add the final tree into our little collection here. We've got all 6 different wood types, including the jungle logs there. That's nice. I'm so happy that we've actually got those here now, because it affords us a few more opportunities when it comes to building. We've also got all of this red sand, which I think I'm going to put here in the chest with all of the sand, but I'm not going to smelt any of this into glass. At least the red sand I'm not going to touch for a little while, because it's a little too precious. I feel like white sand we can get in larger quantities than red sand. The red sand only generates as a top level to those Badlands biomes as well. Underneath that, you just get orange terracotta. So red sand a little bit more precious than the other stuff. We've also got a few stacks of the aforementioned terracotta, and I picked up a couple of the other colors as well, just for demonstration purposes. Where should we put this? Have we got a spare chest somewhere around? Maybe we can put it in here with this one, because this is the sandstone stuff in here. Not going to worry too much about that right now. We'll probably pop these in. But in general, it's coming to my attention that we are running out of storage space here in our little cubbies inside the house, and we will probably leave this stuff standing for now. We could expand up into this sort of attic space if we wanted to, and I've been meaning to put an attic space in this house for a while, but even that feels a little bit limited in terms of its scale, so I think we'll probably end up making another storage system relatively soon. If not an actual automated storage system, then at least something that we can have a lot more chests in and categorize stuff a little bit better, because right now it's getting to the point where anything new is just going wherever I want to throw it. And before I put these melon slices away, I will show you one of the things you can do with melons in this game, although I do need more gold nuggets, it looks like. Okay, so 1 melon slice surrounded by gold nuggets will get you a slice of glistering melon. Normally this used to be, the reason I thought we needed fewer gold nuggets is that this used to be a single gold nugget and a melon slice. So if you're playing in an earlier version of Minecraft, you might not need this much gold. But in any case, the glistering melon is no longer a food. Once you've crafted that, it is actually a potion brewing ingredient. And I can demonstrate by brewing one of these up right now. If we throw a nether wart in there, adding a glistering melon to an awkward potion once you've brewed up water bottles and nether warts will get you a potion of healing. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we got a couple of them from the End City ships. You get instant health, and instant health 2 is the one where you just add some glowstone to it afterwards to enhance the effect. So we will be able to brew up a few more instant healing potions, which, especially if they are splash potions, are pretty useful in a pinch for getting back some health, especially if you're fighting the Wither or something like that, which, don't worry, we are going to do at some point. I know a lot of people have been commenting about how I need to fight the Wither. I'll get around to it, guys. I'm not in any hurry to do that just yet. So the main reason we've just emptied out all of this stuff is so I can have an empty shulker box and we can bring some materials with us, because it's going to be a little bit of running around today, a little bit of showing you some different biomes and some different ways of building. So let's start over here in the extreme hills, where I can show you something that's a little bit more subtle than the effect we saw in the last episode with the difference between the taiga biome and the jungle, but it's still there. If you look at the grass color here and the grass color there, they are quite different. This is a mountains biome. I mean, it's gravelly hills, gravelly mountains, there we go. But it is still a mountain biome, which means it is a cold biome. The temperature of this biome means that the grass grows a little bit more kind of grayish, a little bit more blue kind of tint to it, whereas the plains biome is more of a neutral kind of lukewarm to warm biome, and you'll find that the grass there is a little bit greener. It's a little bit more saturated. Not quite the oversaturated tone of grass you'll get in a jungle or a roofed forest or on a mushroom island if you replace all of the mushroom island with grass, but it's still a little bit greener. And that typically tends to inform how I build. I'm starting from a bit of a weird place, actually. Let's go back a couple of steps. So the style you want to build in is totally up to you. In this case, we're going for something that is bordering between medieval and fantasy. And the reason we're doing that, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, is because medieval and fantasy builds kind of suit the materials it is possible for you to get in the early game of Minecraft. Think of the stuff that's available to you right when you start the game, when you're still crafting your first tools and when you're looking at the world around you. Chances are you'll be finding a lot of wood, because the main thing you need to start making materials from in the early stages of the game is wood. And wood is available throughout the game, and it's available in all different forms, and most importantly, you can harvest it en masse. You can harvest it in bulk. It takes a while, because chopping down trees is always something that you have to do relatively slowly with an axe, but you will still be able to acquire a massive amount of wood as you go throughout the game. The same is true of stone. Stone is pretty much everywhere in Minecraft. Even if you dig down below the surface in a Badlands biome or a jungle or anywhere like that, you're always going to find stone between sea level and bedrock. You're also going to find these variants of stone, andesite, granite, diorite, and so forth. And so those are all materials which are very accessible to you in the early stages of the game. So right away, some of the stuff you might be considering building will probably have stone and wood incorporated into it, and will probably get a more medieval flair as a result. You don't see a great deal of contemporary houses built out of giant logs and stone bricks like this. I mean, you might, and depending on the style of build you can pull off, the kind of stuff that you're interested in building, you might be able to make a beautiful modern house out of the same types of materials. But if you're like me, you tend to start out with medieval builds anyway when it comes to a world like this. It's a lot easier to establish a medieval atmosphere. Not to mention the fact that you're fighting with swords and bows and you're chopping down things with axes instead of a chainsaw. You get what I mean? Minecraft in general has a bit of a medieval vibe to it, and so that's the build style we're going with for this area. Now, going back to what I was saying about the different colors, the different types of biomes we have here, that kind of informs how you build stuff, especially if you're considering this being an actual temperature of a place. You probably want to build something that looks a little bit warm and cozy in a cold biome. You don't necessarily want to build something with lots of open spaces in it, lots of open air windows and stuff like that. You're probably not going to be building out of sandstone, not least because it is a kind of warmer tone. You're probably going to pick materials that are local to the environment, like wood and stone, and things that are going to have a colder tone to them or a brighter tone. Things like greys and whites are usually pretty well at home in these colder biomes. There are some great YouTube videos out there that will go into color theory and how that affects builds in Minecraft, and it's not necessarily the kind of thing that I'm super great at teaching. I don't really have an artistic background, believe it or not, so I'm not going to tell you guys all about that stuff because there will be a lot of things that I get wrong. But if you want to start building in a biome that's got this kind of colder grass color, you might want to consider using things like light blue and stuff like that in your builds, depending on what you're building, of course. But if you come into a cold biome like this and you start building with stuff like red sandstone and terracotta, everything's going to look a little bit out of place unless you really know what you're doing and you're incorporating it in as color accents and things like that. Meanwhile, down here on the plains, where you've got a slightly yellower tint to the grass, it's less blue, it's a little bit more yellow, not to mention the fact that we have all of this wheat around here. There's plenty of nice nice blue water around, but there's also a variety of foliage and vegetation. There is dirt around the place. There are animals roaming, that kind of stuff. That's going to lend itself to a little bit of a warmer atmosphere. And this is the kind of place where you might see stuff like terracotta come into effect, and it's not really going to hurt the look of your builds too much. It's actually going to look a little bit warmer around here if you start to put some terracotta builds down. Let's actually grab some terracotta since I'm using it as an example so often. And let's imagine that there is a section of this path here that is kind of built more out of clay. Like the dirt around here has been worn away to the extent that it's all sort of smushed down into this kind of terracotta-like substance. That's actually blending in not too badly, I think. It's an interesting look around here, and I think if the grass were even greener, it'd be a really nice contrast. I built with terracotta in jungles before on Season 4 of Decidedly Vanilla, and the green grass combined with that red hue of the terracotta is actually really quite nice. And if we replace some of these oak logs with jungle logs, you can really start to see the difference there, because the jungle logs have little flecks of green in there to kind of imply that they're in a rainforest type of environment where the atmosphere is a little bit more humid, maybe there's a little bit more moss growing and that kind of thing. So if we wanted to, we could swap out all of the oak around here for this jungle log, and not only would it blend a little bit better with the grass around here because it's adding that element of green, it also looks a little bit more at home next to the terracotta because the wood color is slightly warmer than the oak logs, which, as you can see, by comparison, are really quite pale looking now. But it might be that you find the terracotta a little bit too much, and to be honest, I kind of liked it the way it was with all of the oak wood around here, considering we've already built so much with oak wood elsewhere in this biome. So I'm going to take this down, but it's really just an example at this stage. It's just something to get your mind thinking about choosing the right materials for the type of stuff that you want to build. Now let's go and apply the same thing over here in our gravelly hills biome so that we can get a look at how terracotta and jungle stuff looks next to this grey color, all of the gravel and the relatively bleak terrain of the extreme hill biomes. So let's lay out a quick little framework of jungle logs here, and let's put some terracotta around the place. Do you see the difference? It's kind of looking really pink, and it's standing out in kind of an unpleasant way next to the color of this grass. I mean, some people might find this color combination appealing, so I mean, more power to you if you do, but it still feels a little bit out of place here, unless we really overcommit to this and we end up building a whole lot of stuff with the terracotta. It's also worth considering the terrain around here and what you want to do with that. See if you want to actually develop any of these mountains and so forth into permanent features, in which case you've already got a lot of stone here to work with. If you wanted to build a castle on this, if you wanted to kind of widen all of that out, then it makes sense to continue working with stone instead of bringing in materials like terracotta that are going to be difficult to acquire in large quantities and mean you would have to take down the entire mountain and re-render it as terracotta. That's a lot of work, and that's the value assessment you need to do, is ask yourself, how much work do I actually want to put into making this weird terracotta mountain in the middle of my gravelly hills? Now that we've actually got one of each different type of wood in the game, I'm actually going to put them up here side by side so you can take a look and compare them all, because there are actually notable differences between them. You might think you don't really notice the difference between dark oak and spruce, but when you put them side by side, there is actually quite a palpable difference here. The spruce feels a lot warmer, despite the fact that it grows in taiga biomes. It tends to grow surrounded by very dark leaves, and that kind of allows it to stand out against the snowy environment of a taiga biome. But I find dark oak actually looks a little bit more at home in biomes like this. It's sort of desaturated. It doesn't have these really deep browns in it. It looks a little bit paler, and paler colors work better in these kind of colder environments. Speaking of which, you seem to be on fire. Can I help you with that? At the same time, oak logs, as I mentioned, look a little bit pale. They don't quite look as grey as the dark oak logs in this environment, but they still look like they belong here in a way. They're still a paler color, a much paler color, and less saturated color than the spruce wood is. Let's take a look at jungle logs as well. And once again, remember, I thought that the moss on here, the kind of greener elements of it, made this all look a little bit more suited to damp environments, and I mean, this could be a damp environment if you wanted it to be, but it's still a little bit out of place and still a little bit too warm. The other thing about jungle logs that it's easier to spot now that you actually put all of these together is that both jungle and I think birch logs are the only ones that have a texture that looks like it's round, and I mean, all of these textures are going to be updated slightly in the next major update to Minecraft, so going through the textures and stuff here is probably overkill at this point, but the birch log doesn't really look like it has a vertical texture. It feels a little bit more horizontal, but the jungle wood definitely has a more horizontal texture. And that, in a sense, can kind of make the jungle log look a little bit more rounded. It kind of draws the eye around the block and makes it look like it's kind of more circular, even though obviously it's just a flat cube like everything else is. And compare now the acacia log to that. And if you don't take into account the end texture, if I just hop down here so you can't see the end texture, acacia logs actually blend in super well with these cold biomes as well, because their gray matches pretty well with the stone that's all around you, and the cold sort of layer of grass around here and the acacia logs tend to blend together pretty well. And so hopefully that explains why I decided to use quite so much dark oak wood in the construction of this build, because next to the spruce logs, for example, this would tend to look a little bit warmer. And obviously we've got enough spruce wood in here, enough spruce planks, that it's going to warm up the build a little bit. And obviously once we move inside, we've got all different types of wood, but these things tend to blend together quite well. I actually find that the spruce log goes better with the dark oak planks, and the dark oak log goes better with spruce, if that makes sense. Like, they've kind of got similar color ranges that they're working with, as far as I'm concerned, so I think that's actually a pretty good call. And until you're confident with the wide variety of materials you can acquire, you're probably going to want to bring a huge variety of them with you when you start a build, just to see what is possible, what kind of combinations you can decide upon. So what we're going to do today is put together a kind of example build palette of what I might consider putting together in a biome like this. It's going to be fairly heavily influenced by this, I'll be honest with you, but even this shulker box and bits of my inventory couldn't contain all of the stuff that I want to potentially build with. So we're going to do a little bit of work here to narrow it down. We're going to put together a build palette for an example build in this area. That's what builders tend to call them anyway. We're going to start with dark oak logs because we know for sure we want to continue using them in builds in this area. So we got the dark oak logs. Let's take a look at what else we have. We know we want to include stone colors, but we've got a whole variety of gray toned blocks that we can use in here. So let's pull out a few of those and test them one by one against these dark oak logs over here. So stone is a shoe-in. Stone works pretty much anywhere. I think you might even have heard people say that gray goes with everything. It's a very good neutral color, and that is definitely the case. So if you got stone bricks and stone like so, you can probably work around with combinations of these as well. Say, for example, that you want to build a big stone wall. You might want to weave a couple of stone bricks in there, here and there, as texture, kind of the same way we did with the cobblestone and andesite walls over there in the farmhouse when we first built that. You might find, on the other hand, that cobblestone is a little bit too high texture for what we're working with over here. Too much cobblestone can look a little bit intense, so you might resolve to use that as an accent block, maybe stick to cobblestone walls because they have a fairly unique shape, or just discard cobblestone entirely. So let's put the cobblestone away for now. I didn't actually use any of that in this build, and I feel like the build is better for it. Give or take the cobblestone walls up there. So we'll keep the cobblestone wall in this palette. I think that's going to look good for now. Let's try out mossy cobblestone for a little pop of color. See, that's good. I do like mossy cobblestone a great deal, but the problem is this green just feels a little bit too bright for the area. Mossy cobblestone's green bits don't really adjust for what biome you're in. So that might work, and it works in mega taiga biomes, so we could potentially leave that in there, but I'm not entirely confident that I want it. So let's maybe put that on the outside here as a kind of afterthought block. Now let's take a look at some of the wood planks we have available to us. We also have things like polished andesite, which, yeah, I think that works. It's usually a pretty good one to apply with stone brick. The chiseled stone I don't think we're going to use here, because chiseled stone looks a little bit too ornate in a way. It doesn't seem utilitarian, it seems flashy, and we don't necessarily want these builds to look super flashy, he says with the giant overhangs on the roof there, but you know what I mean. Like, we're not necessarily working with a chiseled stone brick kind of environment here, so we'll put that away. Now, anyway, back to what I was saying about the planks. Let's take a look at these next to some of the logs here. So spruce planks, yes, spruce planks are a definite, and I think oak planks are pretty good as well. They're not a bad pairing, those three. They tend to provide a decent spread of wood colors, because just using one wood color throughout a build can get kind of boring. So I think it's probably a good idea to mix things up a little bit. Have the dark oak logs, the spruce wood, and oak planks. I think that's a good color combination. And even the end textures of these dark oak logs don't look too bad. The dark oak planks, on the other hand, I think are a little bit too rich for this area. They've got too much of that warmness to them, that warmth. and I think that's not going to work out super well in this area, so I'm going to put those back in there for now. I don't think they're going to work super well with those. Like I said, let's take that out and show you the example. Oh, I don't have any spruce spruce logs on me, never mind. Likewise, we've got the birch planks and we've got the acacia. I think the birch probably has potential to go in there somewhere, or maybe if we end up using a stripped birch log, which I put the birch logs back away, but stripped birch is actually a decent one, and the birch planks, to be honest, don't go too badly in biomes like this, so I might keep that, again, maybe in reserve. We'll put it over here with the mossy cobblestone. But the acacia is a definite no-no. That's far too orange, far too bright, really won't go all that well with the type of build we want to make here. We will find a lot of granite and diorite in this area, and they do tend to fit in quite well, but I'm not a fan of either of the textures here. The textures, again, are going to change, and I think granite is improving as it goes. Diorite people are never very fond of, and I can see why. It's a very noisy texture, kind of reminds you of TV static or bird poop. Bird poop is the obvious one, that's the one everyone goes for, and so I'm deciding to put those away for now. Alternatively, we could always make a little bit of the polished variants of each, and you might find good uses for that in a floor or something like that, but yeah, I don't tend to use granite or diorite in any great quantities. I'm probably going to put those away. Let's take a look at the oak and spruce fences while we're here. I've used both of those in this build. I think, if anything, the oak fence is probably going to look a little bit better. It's going to pop out against the darkness of those logs, so I think that's probably a good shout there. Here's a couple of curveballs. Grey wool. Do we want to put grey wool in this build? I don't think so. It's got almost a little bit of brown in it compared to the stone there, which I don't really think blends all that well. I mean, if you didn't have any other kind of materials that you wanted to blend the stone with, having a combination of grey wool and that stone would kind of be okay, but I really don't think that it looks kind of like a muddy stone almost, and I'm not certain that's the aesthetic we want to go with. On the other hand, stone slabs, those provide a nice pop of light that I think is nice, and they're still quite clearly stone. They've got the same stone texture, just lightened up and kind of overlaid with the brick texture here. So those are not too bad, and I think they would look quite good. They've already been used for the kind of end cap sections of these logs where the stairs go up to the first floor of the build there, so that's actually a good idea. I think we'll keep the stone slabs in here, but we'll put the wool away. Now we're getting exotic. Now we're getting into the real curveballs. I mean, white wool is not a huge curveball, and I've already used it in the build up there, so I'm fairly certain you guys know it is going in. It is the pop of brightness that we need, and actually, next to that, the stone slabs really don't look all that bright. The white wool is really quite good. And also, you find that in a lot of medieval and Tudor builds, you tend to put in white walls and stuff like that to give the impression of plaster walls, the kind of early wattle and daub kind of walls that they used to use back in those eras. So yeah, we're definitely using large areas of wool like that as the backdrop, and then that's the kind of stuff that we can layer fences and slabs over if we want to. There's some good stuff going on there, some good interactions between blocks. We could maybe even start to work the spruce fences in there if they can kind of be a contrast to the white wool. That might not be a bad idea. Now let's look at stuff like, for example, some black concrete. If we want to throw black concrete in here, it's definitely going to have to be in places where the build needs to have patches of darkness that we actually want to fill up with blocks, because black concrete, compared to all of the rest of this textured stuff, just looks like a void. It looks like a complete hole in the scenery right there. So we're not going to really include that unless there's a space that we want to fill up. Say we want a doorway to look completely black behind it. If there's, like, let's cut this open for a second and imagine there is a doorway, archway kind of thing here that you don't actually want to lead anywhere. You just want to give the impression that there is another place to go to from this build. Let's take this fence down and yeah, just frame that out for a second. It sort of looks like there is something you could go to beyond that. From a distance, you could imagine that that just leads out into a dark corridor. But I think as far as actually including it in builds go, the black concrete is not going to do super well. If we want to stick to this kind of medieval build style, black concrete is not a realistic material to apply to that kind of era. Here's another curveball, nether brick. Nether brick is a weird one. It's a very, very distinct color. It's got that kind of dark wine red to it, and that kind of doesn't go too badly next to this grass, if I'm honest with you. There's just something about the pairing of them that matches up quite well, and if I knew more about color theory, I'd probably be able to explain this a little bit better. But maybe, I don't know, it is a little bit too, like, compared to the stone brick doesn't have a very dense brick layering texture, whereas this one does. There's lots of little bricks in here instead of 3 large bricks, basically. So I think maybe the nether brick might look a little bit too complex for this time period. If we're talking about a medieval sort of time period, then yeah, it's looking a little bit too sophisticated, if anything. Speaking of sophisticated, let's give quartz a try, maybe in combination with this white wool, and see how a solid kind of version of the white wool would look. That's not terrible, to be honest. I would almost treat it the same way as the concrete in a sense. I might only use it very sparingly in the build. The other thing about the quartz block for me is that it tiles kind of weirdly. They've got this kind of join between them that I'm not a big fan of. I would much prefer to build large, smooth areas of quartz, which isn't really possible with the current textures. Now, the other fun thing about quartz as a material, once you've made it into blocks, you can make it into a bunch of other blocks, which include quartz pillars, which are a lot more versatile. Think of them like logs. They can kind of join on various different ways. They can rotate very easily, and they are really quite nice for building like Greco-Roman style things, so more ancient structures where they had pillars made out of marble and that kind of stuff, or even pillars of other material that has just been kind of bleached white by the sun by standing there for years and years. It's good for ancient building, for large impressive buildings, not necessarily a material that we're going to use in our rustic medieval area. From a more practical perspective, when it comes to stuff like creeper defense, quartz also has a very low blast resistance, so if you're building and there might be creepers around, then beware, because quartz is probably not going to shield you from creeper explosions super well and will be destroyed very easily. Now, the final few curveballs we've got for this little building session here, we're going to have purple. Oh dear. I mean, I think actually purple in these cold biomes with the grass color looks quite good. It's got that kind of like 80s VHS retro kind of feel to it, that kind of hyper light drifter sort of feel. And if you were building this weird futuristic style with large areas of this kind of green grass and some decaying stuff all around and ruined buildings, I feel like purple wouldn't look too bad, but it's a very specific aesthetic to go with. And again, really not the kind of thing you will find in builds like this. End stone bricks are an interesting one. And I think there is potential to use end stone bricks in stuff like this because they're not that dissimilar from stone brick. If you look at it, it's just got like a slightly more kind of shaded area to it, and it's built in the same sort of fashion as stone bricks are. And on its own, in this environment, again, it's got that pale color, that sort of sickly color to it. It wouldn't be all that bad. But with the medieval side of things, I don't really see it working out all that well, unfortunately. Now, finally, this is one that I'm fairly convinced is going to work quite well. Red wool. And red wool looks quite bright when you hold it in your hand and in your inventory, but when you place it down, it's actually a little bit more subtle, and it's the brightest thing here as far as color saturation goes, but you'll find medieval colors like red, blue, green, and yellow, the kind of traditional almost colors. They actually go quite well if you're using them sparingly as accent colors or maybe wool banners hanging down from walls, that kind of stuff. You will find that they could almost represent different factions of an area. Say, for example, that you had a kingdom over here that had a red and white banner warring against a kingdom over in that direction that had a yellow and black banner. You can work details like this into your builds, and it will start to add a little bit more lore to the world. If that's the kind of thing that you're interested in, then yes, definitely start including wool colors. Wool, once again, is another one of those materials that it's easy enough to acquire in the early game and really fits with the medieval time period. So at this point, from the materials that we easily had at our disposal, we've managed to narrow everything down to a pretty reasonable selection here. So we've got dark oak, spruce, and maybe a little bit of birch if we wanted that, but I've put that back in the box for now. Stone, with stone bricks and stone slabs, obviously, as an offshoot of those. We've got cobblestone walls, andesite and polished andesite, and then 2 different colors of wool. That's all pretty manageable as far as early game construction goes, and those are the materials that you can now focus on acquiring a whole bunch of. If you want to farm a whole bunch of wood, for example, I'm going to need a ton of dark oak if I intend to use logs as heavily as I've used them in this structure, and that means you've got some set objectives now. You can start working on a tree farm, you can start working on growing a lot of dark oak. At that point, you can start producing as many structures as you want because you'll always have the materials to set up. You can also start putting together examples, stuff like this. Maybe throw together a few blocks to see how they look together and combine the things that you know are going to work together and the things that you're not entirely sure are going to work together and see if you can come up with a few interesting tests. You might decide that walls look good as a mixture of stone and andesite, or you might want to throw some polished andesite and stone brick in there. You might decide that all that looks too busy and you want to strip it back to just one type of material. You can test these things out. Keep a bed nearby so that you can sleep through the night if you're working in the open, but give all of this a try. Spending some time doing this and figuring out different combinations of blocks and where they can sit in relation to each other is how you come upon stuff like interesting wall designs and different combinations that you wouldn't have thought were possible before. You can even start to draft stuff to go next to it, try different combinations of materials next to each other and see what you like. Maybe we'll even draft a little flag here, considering that we want our red and white kingdom to fly its flag over here. And there we go. I think we've got it. I think that's looking pretty good. A couple of extra touches around here, like these stone buttons kind of looking like spare bricks that have been left around the place, or maybe even the occasional stone to kind of litter the landscape naturally, pebbles and stuff here and there. I think that's looking pretty good, don't you? Right, I think it's time to wrap this episode up here. I know I said we would probably get to building some kind of extra perimeter walls around the edge of the river here, but we'll have to get to that in an extra episode because I talked to you guys to death about all of these these building things that I like to talk about from time to time. I hope you found this episode interesting and informative. Hopefully it will be useful to you in your future builds, but that's going to be it from me today. Thank you so much for watching the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on the episode if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.